Nelumbo opened her eyes to find herself in a large, crowded, and dark subway station. The lights were on, but despite the intensity of the light, it was, to Nelumbo at least, dark. Her vision seemed clouded and foggy, and she blinked several times as she looked around, her head throbbing with an unknown headache. She was sitting on the benches by the wall, slumped. As she sat up, rubbing her temples, something slipped off her head and hit the ground softly. She glanced down and saw a hat on the ground. Well, no, it wasn't exactly a hat. At least, according to her muddled memory, it didn't resemble any kind of hat she knew. Speaking of, her head was seriously messed up. She knew a total of 3 things: her identity, her parents, and the fact that she was dead. Honestly, knowing she was dead when she couldn't quite remember anything else was quite amazing. And hilarious, though her opinion would not be shared. At least she wouldn't be disappointed when her head cleared up. Nelumbo just sat there for a few moments, trying to get herself together. Her eyes stared in the direction of the strange cap on the ground, but her brain wasn't really seeing it. She felt different. Her body, or perhaps the lack of a body, was throwing her off. She could see herself just fine, but if she focused her eyes on anything else, it would sort of dissolve. She could definitely feel her 4 limbs, torso, and head, which was a relief. This new sensation wasn't unfamiliar or strange. Somehow, it felt just right, like this was the natural order of things. Now, Nelumbo was dead, so it wasn't like she could question anything that happened afterwards, but she thought it would be nice to know why she was at a subway station. At least it wasn't the restaurant. That would have made things 10 times weirder. Unexpectedly, she heard the footsteps of someone approaching. Her eyes focused on a pair of gray slacks clad with brown boots before her, which, now that she was looking, were both similar to her own. Identical, in fact. This was definitely strange. Of all things, the dead now wore matching clothes, apparently. She was slow to react as the figure bent down and an arm appeared in her field of view. Only when they straightened, taking the cap with them, did she look up. Nelumbo saw that it was a man, with the same headwear as the one he was holding, and a light brown leather trench coat. Or, no, was that really leather? Before she could say anything, he placed the cap on her head. A strange feeling seemed to embrace her, and she blinked, stunned. Her hand reached up to grab it, but he placed his own gloved hand on hers. "I wouldn't take that off if I were you," he said, his voice soft. He was clearly male, though how Nelumbo knew, she couldn't tell. She stared at him. The reason she couldn't tell? His face was completely covered in shadows, his facial features hidden. It was uncanny, like looking into a dark void. She found her voice. "Why?" The man gestured around. Every dead person in the station, was staring at her. Most of them were awkwardly looking away, but it was as if they saw her dance. For context, she could not dance. "Your newsboy cap protects you," the man said. "Keep it on. If you take it off, we can see your soul." He paused. "For context, it's like seeing you naked when you are alive. Instead of a body, we see your life laid bare. The cap prevents us from seeing you like that." Nelumbo appreciated the honesty, but nothing stopped her from feeling incredibly embarrassed. When he said laid bare. Thanks. She waited. "It's best for us not to know each other's names. We know yours, but we'll pretend we don't. And there's no need to thank me." He tipped his hat at her and walked away. Nelumbo stood, and seeing everyone's awkward side shuffle away from her when she walked forward, she cleared a path to the edge of the subway track, where she peered up and down the rails. She felt a light rumble in the ground, then turned away, examining the crowd. Death was odd. The afterlife, in general, was odd. There were, typically, two sides to the station. However, not a single, literal soul was on the other side of the tracks. All the dead people were on one side. Everyone in the subway station was also dressed exactly alike. Everyone seemed to be of the same height, same build, same everything. This meant a lot of people looked nothing short of twins, as the station itself was giant. The only difference was the way they acted. It was strange, because though Nelumbo had never been good at interpreting body language or telling anyone apart from anything but the face, in a world without faces, she could differentiate everyone perfectly by their behavior. She could spot the man who had helped her earlier, despite the identical hats, trench coats, and bodies that separated them. She adjusted her newsboy cap again. The overall style was questionable. So was the whole subway thing. What exactly does this mean? Was the afterlife in scriptures and myths completely wrong? Or was this simply one afterlife? Were there more? Or were they even at the proper afterlife yet, seeing as this was a station where they were waiting for a subway? Nelumbo wanted to ask someone, but before she could, there was a loud horn that came from the tunnel. Everyone in the vast station, around 10,000 people, though from first glance you wouldn't be able to tell, stepped back from the edge and turned their heads. The subway's unique roar and high-pitched screech echoed in the air as it slowed to a stop. Nelumbo counted at least 4 dozen cars as they passed by her, before settling and halting. The windows were dark, but not entirely black. They were see-through for sure. Being the front, she was able to spot 100 or so people in the car before her through the windows. They were dressed the same as herself and everyone else, as far as she could tell. Most were standing, while some got lucky and sat in the seats. She heard a hiss as the door slid open. She couldn't even catch her breath when the people around her were pushing past and, in the process, shoving her into the car. Most of the people already in the train were exiting out the other side. Nelumbo knew, just instinctively, the subway wouldn't let her or anyone from her station out once they were in. Instead, she went to the front of the car and held on to one of the handles dangling from the ceiling. She was so focused on 2 people arguing for a seat in the car that she didn't notice the person standing directly next to her. He cleared his throat, and she jumped. Hello. Can you be scared to death when you're already dead? She blurted. She covered her mouth, then remembered that he couldn't see her mouth anyway, and removed it. Sorry. Actually, could he see her mouth? He wasn't exactly like the other dead. Instead of the same 1900s-style clothing everyone else had donned, he wore a weird mix of a conductor's suit jacket, tie, and hat, and a wizard's cloak, robes, and hat. And yes, this meant that he had 2 hats, the wizard hat on top of the conductor's hat. I don't believe so, the man said. He was also taller than everyone else. His eyes were void black, but apart from them, his face was hard to focus on. It was there, and she could clearly see it, but she couldn't get a hold on the actual image. She couldn't describe it. Great then, she managed. There was silence, save for the shuffling of dozens of boots in the car as the dead entered the train. Either settling into the seats or standing, a hand on the handles or poles to steady themselves. She couldn't see their faces, but it was like she didn't need to know what they were feeling. Most were confused, some were excited, some were scared. It greatly contrasted the few people that were in the subway to begin with, but didn't step off. They looked resigned, tired, and various degrees of frustrated. Nelumbo heard the doors close with a hiss as the last passenger stepped aboard. The conductor spoke then, as the train rumbled alive. Alright, passengers, I'll go over the rules. Right now, you are aboard the Ima Express, the Intermythical Afterlife Association, which will take you to your afterlives. Murmurs and conversations immediately sounded around the crowd. The conductor snapped his fingers, and the sound was oddly loud, and brought everyone's attention back to him. You will have questions and you will be confused. I will not be answering them. However, the more you stay on this train, the more you will find out. For the new passengers, the train will stop in 1,800 stations or less. Your tickets are in your pockets, and they will show you what station you're destined for. Nelumbo patted her pockets with her free hand and found a slip of colored paper, numbered 1,786. He continued. You are allowed to get off at any and all stations before your own, but you cannot get off at any stations after it. If you do not get off by the time you are at your own station, and you try to get off after, you'll end up in hell. There's no nice way to put it. Even if you try to stay on, well, trust me when I say that you won't be able to. So I highly suggest you get off at your station, or before. You'll find that it is better to wait until we arrive at your destination, but you may choose otherwise. Nelumbo glanced to the side and saw someone else holding their ticket. On it was the number 16. Jeez. The conductor wasn't finished. Like I said, I will not answer questions, but I will tell you one thing. Until you meet with your lawyers, you are not yet dead. That brought up another bout of confused and astonished murmurs. Nelumbo had promised herself that she wouldn't question things until she found someone who could actually answer, but in her head, she was already asking a billion of them. The weird wizard conductor hybrid kept speaking, his voice mysteriously amplified to be heard by everyone. And until you step foot off this train, remember this. This is your second chance. Nelumbo wasn't sure how she was still on the train when the doors opened for the 1,439th time, at the 1,439th station. At least, that was the number of stations she stayed in. The subway was torturous. The gap between each station was infinitely long. Each time the doors closed, it felt like months, years, a lifetime before it opened again. The train car was always silent, save for the occasional shuffling as people tried to find new positions that were not as painful as the previous. No one spoke, or rather, no one dared to speak. The atmosphere was tense, and the sight of the tall conductor staring over their heads was intimidating, enough to shut everyone up. Time wasn't linear in the Ima Express, but it was painful. The only times the silence was broken was when someone started yelling and screaming, as if insane from the weight. Those people threw themselves out the door on the very next stop. By the 10th station, over half of the passengers that got on with Nelumbo were gone. More people kept pouring in at every stop, and more people kept exiting at the same time. By the 1,439th, only she and another passenger were from her original station. She hadn't sat down a single time since she got on the train. She hadn't spoken in what felt like eons, and she could only watch as people entered and exited the car. It felt almost symbolic, poetic. Not that she cared enough to name it. When the doors opened for the 1,439th time, and she observed the people entering the subway from her spot by the front, she saw something unexpected. Her eyes widened. A figure, the same build and same clothes as everyone else, had entered the train. However, he had no hat. As she peered at his exposed soul, it was like her perspective of him completely turned a 180, and an onslaught of information entered her brain. This person, No, this boy lived an incredibly short, yet rich life. His soul seemed to shine with white light, untainted and pure. He was young, sweet, and innocent. Even in death, on the Emu Express, surrounded by adults and unfamiliar people, even knowing that he was dead, he looked around with a quiet curiosity. His eyes, which spoke essays about his life, his experiences, and himself, were filled with a childish wonder. It wasn't easy to describe his physical appearance, because they weren't exactly physical. More like they were made of segments of his life, like written words, but ones that you didn't need to read to understand. Nelumbo opted to stay in her place, but she watched the boy closely. So was everyone else in the car. Some looked away, embarrassed, or just to save face. Not that it mattered. A majority of the car was staring. She supposed it made sense. To see someone else's life from their perspective laid out, bare, for everyone to see, for everyone to understand, was not an experience any of them ever had. It was peculiar, indescribable. Nelumbo was so stunned by this new feeling that she didn't notice the boy walking toward her, or at least towards the front of the car. For some odd reason, no one dared to come close to the front of the train car. She suspected it was because the conductor was there, who refused to speak a word to the passengers in between his welcome speeches, and no one was brave enough to stand next to him. No one, except for Nelumbo and the little boy. As he grabbed onto the handle, Nelumbo found it strange that he didn't have a name. 10 years of life, and yet the boy didn't have a name. It wasn't like he forgot, he simply didn't. Then again, it might not be that surprising. The boy was 2 generations after Nelumbo, from what she could tell in his soul's lifetime, and he lived in New York. He was born on the streets, and his mother died early of cancer. His father was never in the picture. So, at the ripe age of 5, he was all alone in the streets of Manhattan, with no one who cared for him, no one who saw him as who he was. Yet, he didn't seem to care. He was a child with a loving mother who gave him, as far as he was concerned, the world, and proceeded to give back after she passed. He picked up trash from the sidewalks, helped the homeless, the elderly, the sick, and even normal people. He took stray dogs and cats to the shelter, and, once, even helped the police capture a thief. He helped those who didn't deserve it. It didn't seem like much, but compared to the vast majority of the world, it was more than enough. As the subway chugged along, people eventually became accustomed to the sight of him, and started minding their own business. Though there wasn't much business to mind, so some returned to stare at the boy. Nelumbo didn't speak a word, despite standing right next to him. She didn't feel like breaking the silent spell that overtook the car every time the doors closed. Instead, she studied the conductor. For the 1,439 stations she'd been through, he had never once budged in both posture or expression. But now, for some reason, he was a mix of surprise, uncertainty, and awkwardness. It showed clearly in his body language. Perhaps even the conductor, who had been here for goodness knows how long, wasn't used to someone standing next to him without their hat. The boy didn't care the slightest. Nelumbo looked away for a while. Even if he didn't seem embarrassed by it, she was. It was simply too awkward to read into his life any further. In the Express, the strangest thing was, perhaps, the fact that appearances didn't matter. Everyone apart from the conductor looked the same, had the same build, height, and didn't show an inch of skin. Everything was the same. But something in her brain shifted when her soul arrived at the station, and now, though she saw identical appearances, her mind seemed to twist and tag them as different people, and group them together or differentiate them. She could see their personalities by their behaviors, so to speak. She could clearly see the boy in front of her as, well, a boy. A boy who was kind, sympathetic, and understanding. A boy who the world didn't deserve. Miss 1473rd Station, heading to the 1474th Station. It took 34 stations for the boy to finally speak up. At that point, her other companion from her station had gone, having left at the 1440th. She wasn't entirely sure, but got the feeling that more than 2/3 of the people from the boys' station were gone as well. Was it something to do with the years and generations passing by? Time was meaningless on the express, but given the boy's birth date and the difference in his New York compared to her New York, it meant that they were picking up people in the future as well. Other people's behaviors also seem to follow a trend from what she's seeing after 1473 stations. After her station, the new passengers all seemed to get progressively more restless, with less patience. They got off faster and squirmed in their spots when in between stations. There were exceptions, but those were rarer than ever. She wondered how long it would take until this train reached the end of its journey, if there was one. And even if it was, she wondered if she'll ever reach it. Infinity didn't have to not have an ending. It just had to be unreachable. Besides, she had to get off at her station anyway, or she'll end up in hell, apparently. During the journey from 1473 to 1474, the boy spoke to her. This was the first time the uncomfortable silence was broken during the ride, and she immediately felt relief. The tension was broken, and her intense anticipation satisfied. She looked down at the boy, even though he was, technically, the same height as her. Perhaps even here, between life and death, he was caring for others. He saw the discomfort, and even though it took him 34 stations to finally speak up, it was more admirable than anything she'd ever done. Yes? Nelumbo cleared her throat. It had been a while since she spoke, and even as a spirit, so she didn't technically have a physical body, she felt weird emitting sounds again. "What's your name?" the boy asked, quietly. Everyone had heard. There was no way they couldn't have. They turned to look, but immediately whipped their heads away again. Nelumbo had a suspicion as to why, and when she glanced aside, yup. The conductor, still looking awkward, was glaring past her and the boy at anyone who looked over. It was weirdly amusing and entirely unexpected. "I'm Nelumbo," she replied. She held out a gloved hand. "And what's yours?" She knew it was a stupid question, but she wanted to ask it, to pretend for a moment that they were having a conversation in the real world, that she couldn't read his life laid out on a silver platter. The boy shook her gloved hand and bounced up and down on the balls of his feet, as if excited to talk to someone finally, after 34 stations in the express. "Nelumbo? That's cool. It sounds like, a very fancy language. Laguine? Latin?" Nelumbo felt herself smile. "Latin, you mean?" Yeah, that one." It was like watching the sun. He shone bright, cheerful, and warm. It blinded her, but she didn't want to look away. "Is it? What does it mean?" She noted how he changed the subject of his name. She couldn't tell if that was deliberate or not. He seemed to do this several times in his life, but even though she could see his life, she couldn't read his thoughts, his intentions, while he made his choices and decisions. She didn't bring it up, however. I'm not sure if it's Latin, but it's an aquatic flower native to Asia. He seemed to sparkle. He looked so impressed that Nelumbo couldn't help but snort. In simple terms, she continued, it's called the lotus. Oh, but that's so cool, he said. I would love to be named after a flower. They're really pretty and have so many meanings. It just makes it cooler when your name is obscurely a flower. She chuckled. Well, what flower do you like? He put a hand under his chin and tilted his head up. He spotted the conductor. The Limba looked and saw him staring at the boy, as if confused. The boy waved at him, and the conductor just blinked. The boy looked back at Nelumbo after he didn't respond. There's this flower I heard about. It's called the daylily? Nelumbo immediately saw the symbolism and the parallel. It wasn't particularly difficult. The boy lived 10 years. Short, bright, colorful, but bittersweet, even if he didn't seem to think so. Daylilies bloomed beautifully, brightly, and plentifully, but each flower only lasted a day. They represented happiness, cheerfulness, and moving beyond past sorrows. That represented the boy perfectly, if Nelumbo did say so herself. She smiled, even though he couldn't see it. She hoped he could read her behavior and know it, though. Daylily. That fits you perfectly. Do you want that as your name? He paused, hesitating. For the first time, she saw uncertainty, nervousness, and anxiety in his stance. Nelumbo found it weird that, though his mother seemed to have given him a name, he never stuck with it. He didn't respond to it, and he never told anyone once his mother died. She supposed he wouldn't have remembered, being so young, but here in the Express, you remember everything about your past, because it was your life. From what she figured out after 1,474 stations, your life defined you in the Express, and nothing else. Looking at the boy's life, she could see the name his mother gave him. He probably didn't want to acknowledge it, however. Sure, he said cheerfully, albeit still with hesitation. Daylily. I like that name. Can I call you Nelumbo, then? She smiled so wide her cheeks hurt, but she paid no heed. She hesitated, but the temptation was too great. She put a hand on the boy's head. His hair, dark brownish red given the information from his life, was fluffy as she patted Daylily. I certainly don't mind.